Rahim. It is my great pleasure to welcome on behalf of the Institute of Strategic Studies, on my own behalf, on behalf of our Chairman Board of Governors, Ambassador Khalid Mahmood, and the entire research faculty, our honored guest today, Ambassador Dr. Akbar S. Ahmed. He is currently serving as Ibn Khaldun Chair of Islamic Studies and Professor of International Relations at the School of International Service at the American University in Washington, D.C. He has a PhD in anthropology from the London University and a Master's of Arts degree from Cambridge University. He has taught at many institutions, including Princeton, and in 2004, he was named Professor of the Year for the DC area by the Carnegie Foundation. Ambassador Akbar S. Ahmed has been awarded the inaugural Peace Award by Gandhi Center. He has also been awarded Sitara Imtiaz, Star of Excellence for Academic Distinction, and Tamga Imtiaz, Medal of Excellence by the Government of Pakistan. Ambassador Akbar Ahmed, if you allow, I would also like to introduce right at this stage Dr. Raj Mohan Gandhi too. If you allow me, I'll just...
Please, it's my honor.
So that after Dr. Akbar has spoken, we have requested and Dr. Raj Mohan Gandhi has graciously accepted to be the discussant. Of course, he is a very well-known name, and before we began our discussions, we had informal chat with him. What a privilege it is for all of us to have him on this forum. I understand he was at the Institute of Strategic Studies some years ago, where he spoke about one of his books on the Punjab. His latest publication, which was December of 2018, was Modern South Asia, a history from the 17th century to our times.
Modern South India. India.
That's right, Modern South India, a history from the 17th century to our times. He is, of course, a historian, a biographer, and he just told us that he divides his time between India and the United States. In the US, he is serving as a research professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He's been teaching in that university since 1997. He has, in December 2017, he served as President Contemporary History at the 78th session of the Indian History Congress held in Kolkata. And many of his books, some of them I can name here: Punjab 1707 to 1947, A History from Aurangzeb to Mountbatten, Understanding India's Founding Fathers, and Why Gandhi Still Matters, an Appraisal of the Mahatma's Legacy. Of course, there's a long list of other books too, and in the interest of time, we will let him explain some of these when he starts. Now, coming back to you, Dr. Akbar S. Ahmed, for those of you who do not know me, let me also introduce myself. I am Izzaz Ahmed Chaudhary, a former Foreign Secretary of Pakistan, and I am currently the Director General at the Institute of Strategic Studies, with which I have been associated for over 2 years. I came to know of Dr. Akbar S. Ahmed in greater intimacy when I served as Ambassador of Pakistan to the United States. I would say that Dr. Akbar S. Ahmed can be proud of possessing so many identities that very few Pakistanis can really boast. He started his life as a civil servant. He became a diplomat, ambassador, high commissioner to United Kingdom. He became a filmmaker. He became an author, wrote on Jinnah. He's a professor. As I indicated in his bio that I read to you, but above all, he's a man of peace. When I was in DC, whenever I needed any sound advice, I knew where to turn to. He was also a regular support to the embassy for its interfaith harmony events. So there's so much that I can talk about him. I think we are very pleased that he has accepted to speak to us. And the topic that he has chosen is India-Pakistan searching for humanity in South Asia. Given what's happening in South Asia, particularly ever since Prime Minister Narendra Modi has taken over in India and has embarked upon a whole new, different philosophy from the one that India had followed. He is pursuing Hindutva, which by definition is an exclusionary ideology, and therefore some implications for the minorities there, and some implications for the image of India, which for decades was identified with democracy, with pluralism. And then India has also its regional dimension because it's the biggest country in South Asia. So India's relations with all its neighbors also matter, which unfortunately at this time are not in the best of the state. There's also a big power politics of impacting South Asia, US-China competition and US tilt towards India. All this is impacting South Asia and India and Pakistan. Unfortunately, at this moment, India and Pakistan are not on talking terms, I would say at all. Even their ambassadors have been recalled. So it's a difficult time to search for humanity, but let's see how Dr. Akbar S. Ahmed does that. Sir, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Azaz. It's a pleasure and an honor to know you and call you a friend. And your introduction made me very nostalgic for the time when we were together in Washington, D.C. and had these long sessions that reminded me of Cambridge and the tutorials with the scholars and academics, because you truly are the scholar diplomat of the Pakistan Foreign Service, and I honor you. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'd like to thank Ambassador Khalid Mahmood and all your colleagues at the Institute. So I want to jump straight in because I know we are running late, and I do want to especially thank Dr. Rajmohan Gandhi for agreeing to be in dialogue with me today and share his wisdom and allowing a bridge to be created. As you said, today there are no bridges, so we have proved that wrong by actually creating a bridge of dialogue. So let me outline my talk. It will be in 3 parts. The first part will be called madness, the second hatred, and the third hope. So 3 parts, and I will then present my conclusions. So madness first. I take this concept from the French philosopher Bernard-Henri Lévy, who's called our age the age of madness. He said we are living in this age. And he's pointed out how the ethnic and religious divisions in society have been exacerbated. Now, I maintain that we are in South Asia creating our own bubble of hyper madness within this age of madness. And I believe that there is a battle brewing that will define not only India, but the entire region. If the mood of unchecked hatred grows in India, a clash with Pakistan will be inevitable, and it could involve a nuclear exchange. The leaders of India can huff and puff against Pakistan, but in their heart of hearts, they can never be sure that Pakistan, if attacked and backed into a corner, would not press the nuclear button. The 2 nuclear-armed nations, India and Pakistan, appear to be teetering on the brink of conflict. You would expect the leaders to tiptoe back from the brink. This is not the case. Now, with the China-India confrontation in the Himalayas, the situation becomes even more dangerous and complicated. There are now 3 nuclear powers rubbing against each other in and around Kashmir. And with the US explicitly lining up with India, it makes 4. Soon, I'm afraid it may be too late for South Asia. It is this uncertainty that gives the confrontation an existentialist edge. A single minute miscalculation could plunge the entire region into apocalyptic chaos. Some of you may recall the sci-fi classic, The Planet of the Apes. You may recall the last lines, which have become classic in Hollywood cinema, in which Charlton Heston utters these immortal words, which really to me are as eloquent as any of Shakespeare's lines. And they could be the epitaph if we don't watch out for South Asia. These lines are, "You finally really did it. You maniacs, you blew it up. God damn you. God damn you all to hell." It's very powerful, but it forces us to think. So with that, let me go into my section on hatred. My premise is that there are two sets of grievances poisoning the atmosphere in South Asia, and we need to navigate between them. The Hindu sees real or imagined insults and humiliation under Muslim rule over the centuries. Muslim grievances are more recent. They see themselves as victims of Hindu prejudice and violent hatred in the last decades of independent India. I could give dozens of examples from newspaper reports and widely seen videos of the horrific violence against Muslims in India. The controversy around Panipat, the recent Bollywood historical blockbuster, was just one example of the media joining this particular debate. And just as President Donald Trump had labeled immigrants coming to the US from the Latin South as rapists and murderers, Bollywood has aggressively begun to make films also depicting Muslims in a similar light coming from the North. Now, mobs of Hindus armed with staffs go out looking for members of the minority communities and kill them, often aided by the police, cold-blooded murder. All the while, gangs film the gory details on videos that are then widely circulated. In the mayhem, I want to point out, Hindu sadhus, the Dalit, Christians, and even nuns have been attacked. Muslims have been targeted in the name of cow protection by the mobs. Muslims are now accused of bringing coronavirus as part of their corona jihad. The corona, upon its arrival on the subcontinent, has turned everything upside down. Indeed, the Indian establishment reacted with Pavlovian predictability by blaming it on Muslims/Pakistan. Even medical doctors, discarding the Hippocratic Oath, have made public statements blaming Muslims for the coronavirus and advising the hospital staff not to treat them as they would be better dead. Nationalist leaders on the national level of the country have made public pronouncements on television, not secretly, not in private meetings, that they are determined to finish Islam and Christianity by the year 2022. And by 2024, they hope that India would be exclusively Hindu and speak of the animalistic tendency of Muslims. So from the harsh lockdown in Kashmir to the lynchings and burnings across India, to the citizenship laws that make Muslims third-class citizens in their own land, to the media and police onslaught, the Muslims of India are reeling. In the public's mind, Muslims and Pakistan are fused, and the hatred easily shifts from one to the other. The acclaimed Indian novelist Arundhati Roy speaks of, quote, a crisis of hatred against Muslims. Here, I think it's important to remember the letter that was written by Babur, the Mughal emperor, the founder of the Mughal dynasty, to his son, Humayun, just before Babur died. It's a remarkable letter, hailed by scholars all over the world, and I want you to listen carefully to it. "O my son," begins the letter, "keep your heart cleansed of religious bigotry. See that temples and abodes of worship of every community should not be damaged. Bring together the diverse religions. In particular, refrain from the sacrifice of cows and dispense justice according to the tenets of each community." I really believe that presidents and prime ministers, not only in South Asia, but abroad, could learn a great deal about governance and humanity from Babur. For those who claim Muslims contributed nothing to India, let me state that we cannot contemplate Indian culture or history without the Muslim imprint, whether it is in art, architecture, or political leadership. I could give an endless list of Muslim contributions, starting with two of India's most iconic symbols, the Taj Mahal and the Red Fort. Although India's founding fathers, Mahatma Gandhi and Pandit Nehru, promoted coexistence between the religions, their vision of modern India is facing an existentialist crisis. There were many telltale symbols of the ignominious rejection of Gandhi and his philosophy of non-violence, ahimsa, in India. Gandhi's ashes being stolen, Gandhi's image being publicly shot at by the National Secretary of the Hindu Mahasabha organization, Gandhi's killer being hailed by the title Mahatma, temples being constructed in his honor, and a cult of personality built around him. Above all, the overt rejection of the notion of ahimsa or non-violence and the frequent explosions of violence. Let me move now and try to cheer you up with my next section, which is called Hope. Now, when we look at what is happening in India, it is easily possible to build or construct theories of a clash of civilizations with one community determined to exterminate the other community. Now, I have found, and as an anthropologist, I can only base my conclusions and my own thoughts and ideas on the basis of evidence. I have found that on the basis of the people I have met from India, Hindus, Sikhs, Christians, that this Hindu-Muslim confrontation really is not to be taken as an absolute. Let me begin by the example of Nirad Chaudhuri, one of the great writers and scholars from India. Nirad Chaudhuri wrote in the 1960s a book called The Continent of Circe, and I admired it. And when I was in Cambridge as the Iqbal chair, I was very keen to meet Nirad Chaudhuri. I was writing a book on Waziristan and to ask him questions about that region. Nirad Chaudhuri has this reputation for being an encyclopedia, a walking encyclopedia. He finally agreed to see me when his minders reported to him that I wanted to see him. By then he was an old man, a celebrity, very difficult to meet him. And they told him, his minders, that I had been assistant commissioner in charge of Kishoreganj, the SDM, in what was then East Pakistan. And to him, I became a link, however weak, with his own past. So he gladly invited me. I visited him in Oxford. And it was a remarkable meeting because from two strangers meeting, we very quickly became two friends, two exiles from a beautiful land, united by our distant memories of that land. And he asked me a volley of questions about Kishoreganj. And when I asked him for a blurb for my book, he gave me a beautiful blurb. It says, and it is on the cover of my book, Akbar Ahmed's book is in a great tradition of the greatest British administrators, Sir Alfred Lyell, Sir William Hunter, and Sir Denzil Ibbotson. Ahmed is also, like them, an anthropologist, administrator. Another towering Indian intellectual and an ex-Supreme Court Judge, Krishna Iyer, also reacted to me in this spirit of inclusive humanism. He reviewed my 1992 book, Postmodernism and Islam, thus: discovering Akbar Ahmed through his brilliant book, Discovering Islam, was my first experience. Ahmed is above all human, and so is his book. I am in love with both. Now, I don't think any author could ask for anything more graphic and more powerful and more really very moving to any author. My next examples are of my students at American University, a Sikh and a Hindu. The former was my teaching assistant, a Sikh at American University. I asked her to reflect on our time together. This is what she wrote. You have been a mentor, a friend, and someone who has led me to view not only Islam, but my own religion, Sikhism, with a new perspective. With you, I have learned to discover the commonalities of faith and the embracing power of human bonding. Our discussions on Sufi Islam, the teachings of Guru Nanak, my time with you teaching the courses of the world of Islam, all have demonstrated the powerful message of humanity, equality and justice that underlines our faiths. Some of my fond memories with you include the time you said a prayer at Nandana Sahib when my daughter was born, and you sent me a photograph the time when we walked into a mosque in DC with our class of American University students, only to discover how divides dissolve across faiths, identities, and culture. The other example is of my former undergraduate student, an American Indian Hindu. When she graduated from the university prior to her joining the University of Cambridge as a graduate student, she wrote me a very moving farewell letter. And a senior colleague said to me at the American University, if a professor gets this kind of letter from a student once in a lifetime, they should consider themselves fortunate. Here are just the last lines of the letter. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed, for inspiring me. Thank you for encouraging me during moments when I doubted myself the most. Smoothed over the bumps and told me to stay true. I will be back to our fig tree soon, my friend. When I miss you, I'll meet you between the stanzas of Rumi. I will meet you in autumn at Cambridge. I will meet you at the bottom of a glass of chai. I will meet you in grainy black and white photographs of brown brigadiers. I will meet you in old history books about civilization. I will meet you in my prayers. I will meet you in our eternal pursuit of ilm. I will meet you there. Yours always, and with my deepest respect and gratitude, Shanti and Salam. There are other examples of this spirit of affectionate inclusion. Srimati Kamla, the widely admired director of the Gandhi Center in Washington, D.C., bestowing the inaugural Gandhi Peace Award on me. Manjula Kumar, celebrated Indian director at the Smithsonian, taking up the challenge of successfully staging my plays with integrity and being taunted for promoting a Muslim author. And the renowned Indian professor Julius Lipner, a pillar at Cambridge University, providing a glowing blurb for my academic book, Jinnah, Pakistan and Islamic Identity, which was part of my Jinnah Quartet, which featured the movie Jinnah. Let me now try to draw in the strands and provide you the conclusion. The interactions I have described are in keeping with the old spirit of nobility of the Indian and Pakistani soul, inspired by the inclusive teachings of the sages of the land like Lord Buddha, Lord Ashoka, Mahavira, Guru Nanak, and on the Muslim side, Tata Ganjbakh Shah Abdul Latif, Bulle Shah, Muhyiddin Chishti, Sayyid Ahmad Khan, and Allama Iqbal. They embraced all, promoted justice, and abhorred violence. This is the spirit that inspired the modern Indian leaders Gandhi and Nehru, and is in keeping with the vision that they had for India and that Jinnah had for Pakistan. And if anyone doubts Jinnah's vision for Pakistan, they must listen to his first speeches to the Constituent Assembly in Karachi in 1947. Both nations must understand that being cruel to their minorities is an act of cowardice and a sign of moral bankruptcy. It is indicative of a weak and failed polity. That is why the early founding fathers, Gandhi and Nehru in India, Jinnah and Liaquat in Pakistan, honored their minorities and reached out to show them support and promised protection. The test of civilization, I maintain, will always be how a majority treats its minority community. When Siddhartha was a young boy, his father, an ambitious chief of the warrior caste, attempted to train him in the martial arts. Siddhartha categorically rejected war and violence of any kind and grew up to become Gautam Buddha. He promoted Shanti or peace and practiced ahimsa and created a world movement that is with us today. The genocide the Rohingya face is by those who have changed the very teachings of the Lord Buddha. Mahatma Gandhi's genius was to take these concepts from ancient Indian history and promote them so that they became part of social and political discourse in South Asia and later across the world. When India achieved independence in 1947, it had high status, especially among the non-aligned movement. It reflected a mystique precisely because of the concepts of Shanti and Ahimsa. And it is this legacy that is being set aside in such a shocking and cavalier manner over the last years. It is like an individual, through his ignorance, throwing away the treasure chest that is his legacy. And ironically, I see a glimmer of hope with the coronavirus. It was the common enemy, and it was terrible enough to put the fear of God into all South Asians. So my suggestion in this concluding note is to appeal to the leaders and thinkers and opinion makers of both nations to understand the depth and urgency of the crisis. This is not business as usual. And when Indians and Pakistanis look at each other, they do so through a military strategic prism. In order to avoid the madness, they must change the paradigm and look at each other through a moral, humanist, philosophic prism. The two nations must share medical research with the pandemic in mind, exchange doctors and nurses as goodwill gestures, and immediately tone down the political and media attacks on each other. Indians must stop killing defenseless members of the minority. We are separate for less than a century, together for a millennium. And as we know, love begets love, hatred kills. It is time for both to seriously consider turning a new leaf. In the absence of vaccines, a palliative exercise calculated to improve mental health during the pandemic is to reach out to family members and friends. Why not reach out to neighbors? It would set the right tone if India, which is vastly bigger, took the lead. My premise is simple. If India is to maintain, in this case, regain its status, it needs to very rapidly change course. Its leaders should eschew those with hatred in their hearts and genocide on their minds. They should be inspired by Lord Ram's righteous path and noble Buddha's ahimsa, the great Guru Nanak Dev Ji's message of love, and the gentle Mahatma and his pursuit of Shanti or peace. The leaders should rediscover the great Indian concepts of ahimsa and Shanti as part of their policy by realigning its position to the Gandhian ideal and its own traditions of humanity. Going as far as back as ancient India, India will have a double advantage. It will strengthen and reinforce its own identity and also reassure those South Asian neighbors who remain highly suspicious of its motivations. The rediscovery is the first and most critical step. The next step is perhaps the most difficult one for Hindus and Muslims, Indians and Pakistanis. It is to put aside our individual egos and confront the reality that we have caused deep pain to one another. We must acknowledge that pain. That can only happen with honest self-reflection. That point has not come yet. It came in South Africa. It hasn't come in South Asia. And if the putrid atmosphere of hatred can be cleared, then the next steps become easier. Scholars, artists, sports figures, and writers must be invited from across the borders to promote mutual understanding. And can we please listen to each other without throwing bottles of ink? Seminars and conferences need to be held and political figures invited to take part and learn. Traders and businessmen must work together for mutual prosperity. None of these ideas are new or radical, yet none of them have been fully given a chance. To cite Mahatma Gandhi, to bring about change, we must become that change. I'm encouraged that beneath the bluster and hatred and violence, there's still humanity. Hindus must never forget that the Qaid, while protecting a group of Hindus being attacked by Muslims in Karachi, declared himself the Protector General of the Hindu community in Pakistan, and in his first speeches to the Constituent Assembly, guaranteed the security and religious freedom of the minorities of Pakistan. Just as Muslims must never forget that Mahatma Gandhi gave his life protecting the rights of the Muslims. For the admirers of the Qaid, as indeed I am, we should appreciate that the Mahatma addressed Mr. Jinnah with respect as Qaid-e-Azam. In a few days, both India and Pakistan will celebrate their Independence Day. What a great occasion to reflect on the journey made thus far and dreams of creating a new and better world that strives to create true Shanti and the Islamic equivalent Salam or peace in South Asia. Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Azaz, and thank you, Dr. Raj Mohan Gandhiji, for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure I reflect everyone's feelings that we are truly moved by a very learned discourse from you. No surprise there because we were expecting that. A very powerful, sound message, and the areas of three main domains that you touched: madness, hatred, and hope. Perhaps I would have shifted the order, that we are passing through the hate phase, and this will lead to madness before we are able to come out of it through some recipe of hope. While you were talking about the grievances of Hindus and Muslims both, somebody had this morning drawn my attention, and I just opened it on my laptop, the book, The Indian Renaissance by Sanjeev Sanyal, and he says that India's rise after 1,000 years of decline. And he stops at India's history up to 11th century, and then takes a jump to 1947 and onwards. Now, these are the literature that is robbing India of its multicultural identity. We can see the phase of ultra nationalism is happening. Only yesterday, Ram Temple was inaugurated. I mean, the brick was laid in place of Babri Mosque. So we honestly don't know where it will ultimately head, but your advice is well taken. I think it's well-meaning. May I now invite Dr. Rajmohan Gandhi to kindly reflect his thoughts on what Dr. Akbar has stated, as well as share your own opinion in view of the rich experience that you yourself possess of the history of this subcontinent. Over to you, sir. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ambassador Azaz Chaudhry Sahab. Thank you, Ambassador Khalid Mahmood Sahab. And thank you very, very much, my good friend, Ambassador Akbar Ahmad Sahab. I think it's very interesting that these prominent, outstanding scholars of Pakistan are all diplomats. I don't know what that means. I know that there are many other wonderful scholars who are perhaps not diplomats. Now, after tough work as an administrator in a demanding area of Pakistan, which was followed by a period in diplomacy at a very high level, Ambassador Akbar Ahmad has served for many years as a distinguished professor on a leading American campus. He's a scholar who also seeks in word and deed to be a reconciler. In his works, he recalls images from the past of wisdom and harmony. He highlights inspiring elements in history, architecture, interfaith relationships, and elsewhere. I respect him for this. In his talk today, however, he has been franker about India's departure from Gandhi and Nehru than about Pakistan's departure from Jinnah. Although he did not speak of it in his talk, I suspect that he is pained by the hostility towards dissenters that exists in Pakistan as well. Now, I was particularly struck and moved by the examples that he is related towards the end of his personal relationships with people from India, of Indian origin, Hindus, Sikhs, and the amazing relationships between them and Ambassador Akbar Ahmad that grew as a result. To me, that is the most encouraging thing for the future. Now, we are not here, neither he, nor I, nor anyone else, to condemn above all. Although sadly, there is so much in both India and I'm afraid Pakistan, perhaps, to condemn. Now, I have many very strong views about what's happening in India, and I often express them, sometimes in newspaper articles, sometimes in other ways. I'm not sure that today, when I'm talking with my Pakistani friends, is the place for me to repeat or elaborate my very strong dissatisfaction to many things that are happening in India. And what so much of the painful story that Ambassador Ahmad has related is true, but I must also point out that as far as the COVID thing is concerned, yes, some people did at the beginning use the chance to turn the COVID also into an anti-Muslim opportunity. But fortunately, that mad exercise died out. And in recent months, mercifully, very few people have, although that line has entered many minds, sadly, much of the popular mind has been affected by that line. But we should recognize that by and large in the last months, the media particularly, and even from those who have the microphone, the megaphone, that particular line has been abandoned. And most people in India do understand COVID for the great, great attack it is on humankind. Now, I feel that this is not the time to express even disappointment about why people are not speaking out against coercion, they're not speaking out against cruelty. One feels the disappointment, one feels deep unhappiness, but I feel that just now on this occasion, maybe that's not the time, not the thing to do. I want to praise those who do speak out. Let us also praise the large number of silent servants of goodwill and insaniyat in both Pakistan and India. There are so many of these, doing the right thing, teachers, doctors, neighbors, humble officials, even policemen, who quietly protect the weak, the threatened, the vulnerable. Let us acknowledge and quietly honor them. Naming them is not smart. It will merely attract the attention of super patriots. Today we know the megaphone has been seized by merchants of hate, but decibel levels are not everything. The murmurs for friendship, the quiet entreaties to the Almighty for peace constitute another real story. In the end, it will also be, God willing, a more powerful story. Yes, yesterday, India's Prime Minister himself commenced the construction in Ayodhya of a Ram temple on land where the Babri Masjid had stood from the 1520s until its illegal demolition in December 1992. Many in India claim that in earlier centuries, a temple had stood on that spot, and that in remote antiquity, Lord Ram was born on that spot. Still, India's Prime Minister, starting with his hands, the building of a Hindu shrine in the year 2020 is a troubling additional step in India's journey away from the secular and pluralist state that was established in 1947, where all were equal before the law and before the government. Now, other nations too are making troubling journeys. I must mention the event last month in Turkey, when the historic Hagia Sophia was turned to the concern of many in the world from a museum into a mosque. Ambassador Akbar Ahmed speaks of the madness that can touch off a nuclear war. He wants, quote, leaders and thinkers of both nations to understand the depth of the crisis, unquote. Dear Akbar Ahmed Sahib, you and I and others, the usual suspects, have been saying this for 50 years and more. And we will keep on saying this. But maybe we should direct our appeal to everyday people. Let even a small number of ordinary people, men and women, make up their minds that as long as it lies in their power, there will be no coercion in our lands, in Pakistan or in India. That people will not be punished for their views, they will not be punished for their beliefs, or for belonging to their religion, or their caste, or to their poverty, or to their dissenting sects. The fault is not of governments alone. Perhaps the greater weakness has been in our societies, in our approaches to one another, or in our lack of approaches to one another. Hindu-Muslim mistrust is not the only mistrust on our subcontinent. We divide by sect, we divide by language, we divide by caste, we divide by biradari, by tribe, by class, by profession. We think we know one another, but we don't. We have opinions about one another, but we don't have knowledge. We don't even have friends from other circles whom we might listen to. We don't even read about them. Allow me, as a friend of Pakistan, I'm going to speak one or two very frank things about my dear friends in Pakistan, because to dear friends in India, I'm always speaking to the extent that I can. Allow me, as a friend of Pakistan, to say this. When half a century ago, the Pakistani people lost the people of Bangladesh, they also lost a fabulous bridge to India, the Bengali language, the language of Akbar Sahib's friend Niraj Chowdhury. But that bridge is still there. If he or she learns Bangla today, a Pakistani Punjabi, Pakhto speaking or Sindhi person, a Pakistani Baloch or Urdu speaking student, if he or she learns Bangla today, would enter Bangladeshi hearts as also Indian hearts. The forebears of many in Pakistan's, today's Pakistan, lived in different parts of today's India, as I heard even at the beginning of this conversation. people born in Amritsar or Delhi. Why shouldn't today's Pakistanis learn more of the histories and cultures of those parts from where their forebears came? Tipu Sultan, who died in 1799, was fluent in the Kannada language, the language of the state of Karnataka, of which the capital is Bangalore, now called Bengaluru. The Qutub Shahi rulers of Hyderabad in India were fluent in the Telugu language. It will be an asset, it will not be a crime, if some people in Lahore, in Pindi, Multan, Quetta, Karachi, Islamabad, they learn Bangla or Kannada or Tamil or Telugu. Of course, it will be of value if some in Kolkata, Mumbai, Lucknow learn Punjabi or Pakhto or Urdu or Balochi or whatever in languages spoken in Pakistan. The improvements we all long for will probably come in unexpected ways. The paths to sanity and reconciliation may be opened up in surprising ways, perhaps by people we are not thinking of. Historians have seen many ups and downs over the centuries. Right now, India-Pakistan relations are in a pretty deep ditch. And on the subcontinent, very few influential people now urge a climb back up to level ground. Within their private worlds, however, a great many Indians and a great many Pakistanis are different. They want better relations between their countries and between majority and minority communities within their country. Indians and Pakistanis also live outside the subcontinent. Look at the partnership in the US, the UK, and Europe between medical experts of Pakistani origin and of Indian origin. What a delight it has been amidst all the COVID anxieties to see doctors of Pakistani origin, Indian origin, explaining COVID to Americans, even as other Pakistanis and other Indians explain other complicated things to Americans. In wanting to assist others, Indians and Pakistanis may perhaps find one another, may get closer and rediscover what they have in common. Another truth may be less pleasant for our pride. Today, persons of Indian and Pakistani origin may feel more confident regarding their fundamental human rights if they live in the US, Canada, and UK rather than in their home countries. I will conclude with a reflection on Gandhi, to whom Ambassador Ahmed referred, and also on Lord Ram, to whom the ambassador also referred. The Ram of whom Gandhi so often spoke is not identical with the prince born, according to believers, in the Ayodhya of remote antiquity. To Gandhi and to many like him in India and beyond, Ram or Rama was a loved name, is a loved name for the unborn, undying, and all-merciful Almighty, called by different names by anxious human beings all over the world. To this all-compassionate and supreme Almighty, to this Ram, this Ishwar, this Shiva, this Khuda, this Allah, I pray that wisdom, peace, courage, and sanity may descend on the people and leaders of India, Pakistan, and the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rajmohan Gandhi. It was a very good reflection on many of the points that Dr. Akbar S. Ahmed had raised in his talk. And we thank you for sharing your perspectives, your wisdom. Ladies and gentlemen, we will have some time now for question answers, maybe 10 minutes or so. If you wish to pose a question to Dr. Akbar S. Ahmed, please, there is a chat box. Please use that. I already have received one question which I would like to pose to Dr. Akbar. The questioner has raised the issue of what's happening in Kashmir. They believe that the repression of Kashmiris is now unprecedented. Some people call it double lockdown. One is corona, the other is curfew. And they also are pointing out to the urgency of doing something, because Kashmiris are losing their Kashmiriyat, they are losing their identity, and through domicile law, things are sort of their demography is going to be changed. So they want that Dr. Ahmed should answer if he has any reflections on what's happening in Kashmir and how humanity can come back to that path.
Thank you, Ambassador Azaz. In fact, before I do, may I thank Dr. Rajmohan Gandhiji for his, as usual, very wise and brilliant summing up his response and his own comments. And I agree in the main, his thrust is towards optimism, towards compassion, towards humanism, universal humanism. And I'm always struck by having to acquire so much knowledge and wisdom when I hear him, whether in person or read him. He truly is one of the sages of South Asia, and we can all be proud of him. I do want to point out that Pakistanis, he mentioned the disappointment with our founding fathers. The Pakistanis do idolize Quaid-e-Azam, as indeed I do. And I am aware that he gave such a high standard, like in a sense, the Mahatma gave for India. What encourages me is that ultimately Pakistanis have in their DNA a respect for the Qaid, and therefore a respect for democracy, a respect for equality, and an inclusiveness. So with all the problems and all the political crises, and there have been many, many in Pakistan, as a country where constantly it's in crisis, the one consistent principle is to strive to maintain some idea of Qaid's, the Jinnah's vision of Pakistan. All Pakistanis strive for that and constantly come back to that. So that with all these movements towards martial law and strongman politics and so on, we inevitably come back to Qaid's Pakistan, which is the Pakistan of compassion and inclusiveness. And you saw recently the opening of the Kartarpur corridor, the constant attempts by all governments, particularly the present government, because these prime ministers and presidents are such admirers of the Qaid, to try to live up to that vision. I would also say that you gave hope to us at the end when you mentioned that there is that tribute that you paid both to the Indian and Pakistanis who you know and who you respect and admire, because they will ultimately change things. Your point about bringing this message into the mainstream is absolutely crucial. I believe in that. And unless we begin to talk more loudly with a bigger loudspeaker or foghorn or through the media, the message is not getting through. So the messages of hatred, of violence are far louder, and therefore they drown out the mass who may be drifting towards one or the other position. So I would constantly urge you to remain in the media, to inform us. When you get time, do appear in the United States media, for example, Fox News, which is seen by a lot of people and influences a lot of people. Unfortunately, not always in a positive light, but that is where the challenge is. So we need to be, and when I say we, all people of goodwill, of good faith on both sides of the border, hold hands and move in this direction. As far as Kashmir is concerned, the question on Kashmir, we all know what's happening there. It's one of the great tragedies, not only for the Kashmiris who have been unfortunately caught in this vice almost, if you like, this grip between the India-Pakistan conflict, but it really is, I think, a failure, a disgrace to all of South Asia that they have converted. Just think of what they have done. They have taken this beautiful region, the questioner mentioned Kashmiriyat. They have taken this beautiful region with this beautiful concept of Kashmiriyat, where people lived in harmony for centuries, where the Mughal emperors would go to this region and call it paradise on earth. And they have taken this region and converted it into a hell on earth. So the stories of rape and lynching and murder and blinding, all kinds of terrible things. And I'm quoting Indian human rights activists. This has to stop. The human rights activists of India have to join up with all good-minded, broad-minded people, compassionate people, and convince or pressurize government to stop this violence, because it is no longer contained, it is no longer hidden, it is no longer in the shadows, it is global, and people are really concerned. So there, for the first time in the West, there are editorials on this. And it brings a lot of shame to that entire region. And my point about outside powers now being involved is a very serious one. For the first time, you have major international powers now directly or indirectly involved in Kashmir, and that does not bode well for the region.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. I have received two questions. Both are interrelated, so I'll just combine them into one. The question is about the movie Jinnah, which they think, these questioners think, was a pure work of art. They think that it was well written and they're backed by an extremely powerful soundtrack. And they want me to ask you to shed some light on the challenges that you faced while making this movie.
The challenges I faced were many, because if you are to touch such an iconic figure like the Quaid-e-Azam, you're touching every Pakistani, because every Pakistani has an idea of the Quaid. So if I put him in a sherwani, some Pakistanis will object. They'll say, why not in a suit? And if I put him in a suit, they'll say, why not in a sherwani? Number one. Number two, what Jinnah do you project? Do you project Jinnah of his youth or of his advanced age when he achieved Pakistan? Do you project Jinnah with a more Islamic frame, within a more Islamic frame, or as he was consistently right to the end, a man with a vision, of a humanist vision, which I think was really formed by his training as a top first-class lawyer in Bombay. That's his training and that's what formed him. And his understanding of the Prophet of Islam, who remained his great hero, and he would refer to him again and again, even in his last speeches he quoted him. And he quoted him in front of Lord Mountbatten as the Viceroy, who came to Karachi and suggested that Jinnah may have Akbar as his role model for Pakistan. And Quaid-e-Azam very boldly, because Mountbatten was still Viceroy, stood up and said, no, we already have a role model, and that is the Prophet of Islam. So it was again an act of which only Quaid-e-Azam was capable of, to present his vision in that company and in the presence of the Viceroy at that stage. The challenges were many, because at that stage there were not many films made in English in Pakistan. The filming itself was hugely challenging because governments change, governments' commitments change. At some stage I'm going to write the whole story. It'll be an eye-opener, and maybe it'll be a bestseller compared to my academic books, which remain on the worst seller list for a long time. But there were many, many challenges, and the story has to be told because it also reflects on Pakistan's loyalty and understanding of Quaid-e-Azam. But in the end, it was worth it because the film was made. It had a huge impact on my personal life. Financially, I was almost finished. It had a bad effect on my health because I had to commit myself totally. But I succeeded not only in completing the film, but completing what was called the Jinnah Quartet. I want everyone listening to this to understand that it wasn't the only project on the Quaid that I did. And I did this quite deliberately. I wanted a popular movie like the Jinnah movie. I wanted an academic, a scholarly documentary. And we interviewed people from Pakistan, from India, from Britain, who either knew Mr. Jinnah or had met him or lived in his time. So it was a fascinating documentary. It's online and worth seeing. Then I did an academic book on the Quaid, which again, I had very good reviews, including the review of Professor Julius Lipner at Cambridge and Professor Shariful Mujahid, the great scholar of Quaid-e-Azam in Karachi, the head of the Quaid Academy, who actually gave me, again, one of these brilliant blurbs. He just said, this is a Mahabharata, referring to the great Hindu sacred text. So the fourth project of the quartet was a graphic novel, and that was for youngsters. So 4 projects reflecting different sections of society. And the aim was that by the end of it, people would have heard of, or discussed, or debated Mr. Jinnah and learnt about him. So it wasn't my attempt to impose my idea of Jinnah. It was simply to hope to revive the extraordinary man, extraordinary leader that we were very proud to call the ultimate founding father of Pakistan.
Indeed, indeed he was. And I can speak for myself that I love him as a man of integrity, as a man of wisdom for us, and he provided so much of guidance to us. One question that I can see that has been typed in is, Is there a way forward for India and Pakistan to break ice beyond the emotional appeals? Beyond the emotional appeals. First, Dr. Akbar Ahmed, and then maybe Dr. Gandhi can also speak to it. Sir.
Ambassador Azaz, in fact, I've tried very hard in this paper to keep it as unemotional and as academic as possible. So even my references have been more historic and sociological, not emotional as such. But I do know that it's crucial for us as a first step, and the question is how do we proceed, is really to start with that tiny step of understanding each other. Rajmohan Gandhiji just described very beautifully and I think very powerfully, because it was emotional coming from his heart, what Lord Ram meant or means to Hindus. I think it's very important for Hindus to understand that that is Lord Ram and that is what they need to convey to us Muslims. And for Muslims then to accept that this is what our great neighbors, the Hindus, the great nation of India, big neighbor in the south, this is what they look up to, this is what they admire. At the same time, it would be really important for Hindus to understand what the Prophet of Islam means to Muslims, or what Qaid-e-Azam means to Muslims, so that the process of understanding can begin. Because without that, we are really trapped by our prejudices, by our stereotypes, and by a lack of understanding. I mean, who knows the examples of the Prophet of Islam, who we say, peace be upon him, we respect him so much, that we Muslims look on him as Mehboob-e-Khuda, the beloved of God. So again, the notion of compassion and mercy is so strong in him that he is called in the Quran a mercy unto mankind. That the two greatest names of God in the Quran, out of the 99 names, are Rahman and Rahim, compassion and beneficent. Now these are little facts, small facts, that we need to be able to communicate to our Hindu neighbors, friends, and others, and vice versa. We need to understand what Lord Ram means to Hindus. And I may point out, and I'm sure Rajmohan Gandhi, being such a great scholar, knows this, that Allama Iqbal actually wrote a poem, a beautiful poem in honor of Lord Ram, in which he called him the Imam of Hind, all of India. Again, these are tributes, and I think we should not shy away from them. We should take pride in them. When I was posted, one of my first postings in the old frontier province, as Assistant Commissioner Mansehra, just outside the Assistant Commissioner's bungalow was an old rock. It was a huge stone. And people said this was a stone from the old times, and no one knew what it was. And I investigated and discovered, to my great excitement, that this was one of the stupas of Ashoka. And I got the exact translation of what the stone said from Lahore, from the museum there. And I had it written off, painted beautifully on large boards. I had a cover put on that rock. And suddenly we were connected. I, as a young Pakistani administrator, with my ancient history, because that is part of our history. Taxila was one of the greatest universities in the world, and that's very much Pakistani, and yet it's ancient history. We know that some of the greatest religious figures in Hinduism, in Buddhism, in Sikhism are linked to Pakistan. Sikhism, in fact, is very much a religion of India, but it's very much a religion of Pakistan. It was born there, it grew there, it flourished there. And as we know, Guru Nanak came back to this area, what is now Pakistan, to be buried there. And we went, as my Sikh student pointed out, I went there to place flowers at his birthplace and to honor his memory, so that in turn I would be honoring my Sikh assistant. And I think that is the way to build bridges and to be able to create goodwill and harmony between communities.
Thank you. Dr. Gandhi?
I think, greatly appreciate and fully endorse what Ambassador Akbar Ahmed has just said. Fortunately, I think fortunately, so many people of Pakistani and Indian origin who, because they don't live at the moment in Pakistan or India, are able to converse with each other. There are opportunities for frank conversation. No visas required, in the US or Canada, UK, Europe, Australia, elsewhere. People of Pakistani and Indian origin can meet, but they don't take the opportunity to meet and get to know each other. So there's so much to learn about one another. History is one, and there's so many other aspects. And as I mentioned, the doctors of Pakistani and Indian origin are collaborating against COVID in so many parts of the world. So if, and this is purely unemotional, so if we really get to know each other and deepen enlarge our bonds, deepen our bonds, times will change. Today, of course, emotionally, it's very difficult in either Pakistan or India strongly to advocate India-Pakistan reconciliation. The air, the mood at the moment does not favor that. But the times will change. But when that times change, there should be a body of Indians and Pakistanis who have really gotten to know each other, scholars who have known each other, in other professions, so that when the wind does change, as God willing it will change, that there will be this pool of mutual knowledge, pool of mutual bonds, which can be used to push the process forward.
Thank you. I don't know, how much time do you have, Dr. Akbar? More, maybe?
I am always available to you, my friend, for you to command.
All right, thank you. Let me just...
Excuse me, sir. We have one more question from Ambassador Tajammul Sahab.
All right, can he type it in the ambassador?
He did, sir. He did. It's typed.
All right, okay. Well, he says, don't you think the measures suggested by you and Dr. Raj Mohan Gandhi are enough to heal the wounds, agony, anguish, sufferings, and pain faced by the Kashmiris and the minorities in India? Don't you think we need to traverse an extra mile by involving all strata of civil societies in India and Pakistan to join hands with humanists, scholars, and professors to take a journey of soul searching and find workable measures to heal wounds? You have addressed this question, but still, Dr. Akbar, if you want to add something.
I think this is a great question, or rather statement. And I think you yourself, Ambassador Azaz, answer it in your own, you embody it in your own character and in the way you behave, in the way you embrace and include everyone. Just this very session we are having is a testimony to your vision and to your wisdom and the necessity to take the step that Mr. Tajammul has raised, that we have to take everyone with us and move along and really have a dialogue like we've just had, very honestly and with integrity. So thank you for that statement.
Well, I have this comment, I would say observation, it is more than a question, from Manjula Kumar. And she says, very interesting session, perfectly balanced voices. One would think nothing is wrong in the world. Besides scholars, professors, let's not forget the power of the arts. So that's, I think, a good observation. Let me raise one hard question again. In the recent years, the relationship between India and Pakistan has really nosedived. I, for one, can appreciate it because when the peace process was in full swing, and I'm talking about 2007, 2008, before Mumbai, I was a Director General South Asia, and I would travel to India every month or so because of the official meetings. And I know that how broad the canvas of cooperation had become at that time, that many people, including General Pervez Musharraf, had started calling the peace process irreversible. But actually it reversed. But these days, in the last couple of years, we have seen it really go down. And in 2016, India, Mr. Modi's government claimed that there was a surgical strike in Pakistan, which Pakistan said that there was none. But in 2019, February, they actually carried out a surgical strike. And you know the rest, the 2 Indian planes came down, a pilot was captured and then released. Now, strategists are thinking that perhaps this is a new normal that India has created, where the 2 nuclear armed states can still engage in conventional confrontation below the nuclear overhang. That's a very, very risky proposition. So all this good talk about humanity doesn't seem to cut much ice with the strategic thinkers at advising Mr. Modi? Sir, Dr. Akbar?
My response would be, having been both a bureaucrat and presently an academic, that very often the bureaucrats and the political thinkers live in a bubble and they plan in a bubble. So some of these actions are being taken by people who really have one assumption in their minds, and that is that we will continue to push the other side and push it, and we'll just get away with it, just under the danger line of the nuclear confrontation, which means they can strike into Pakistan and come out again and nothing will happen. That's why I pointed out that that is a gross miscalculation, and we need to understand that Pakistan, with all its history, it's a much smaller country. It's faced with many problems that in its own way are challenging to Pakistan's very existence at times. And yet consistently over the last 78 years of its existence, it has stood up for its own integrity and its right. 3 wars, losing the wars in some cases, but still standing up. So the chances of Pakistan not reacting to provocations like this are very risky and very dangerous to take. And therefore, this miscalculation by the bureaucrats in Delhi who are planning and who sometimes I think are intoxicated by their own verbosity and their own sense of self-importance, they need to understand that this is very risky and can be counterproductive, as has happened in history. This is where the humanists, the scholars, the people of good faith, the intellectuals need to puncture this bubble within which these bureaucrats live and plan, and sometimes cause so much damage, not only to their neighbors, but to themselves.
Thank you. One last question, and then we will be thanking you. Let's take his scope of history. You both are historians. When I read Stanley Wolpert's Shameful Flight, he clearly held Brits, namely Mountbatten, responsible for the messy partition that happened. When I read Jinnah by Jaswant Singh, he also felt that Jinnah was not really responsible for what happened, but he mainly blamed Congress for the partition. When I read Iqbal Akhund, Memoirs of a Bystander, he tried to explain that this population swap was actually never intended, at least not by Jinnah, because he thought that we are creating a Muslim state of Pakistan in the Muslim majority areas, presuming that minorities will be safeguarded by the majority here, and in India, Hindus will safeguard the Muslim minority. So this population swap was never anticipated, at least not by Jinnah. I don't know about others. What happened? Why? Because one of the reasons why India and Pakistan could not bridge the mistrust was also because the way partition happened, it left a deep scar. I'd like to start with Dr. Gandhi, and then we'll like the final word from Dr. Akbar. Sir.
No, this is a very important subject, and not a subject that is very easy to examine objectively. However, you're quite right that eventually when Pakistan was created, it was created on the basis of Muslim majority areas. But remember that throughout the campaign for Pakistan and in the elections that took place in the entire subcontinent in the 40s, various elections, the two-nation theory was very strongly advocated, that Muslims and Hindus cannot live together. So not only that, and there was also a very important slogan. In the end, that slogan was not decisive when Pakistan was created, but there was a slogan that there should be a Muslim homeland on the subcontinent. So among some Muslims and among many Hindus, there was a view that if Pakistan is created, that is where the Muslims should live. And in India, the Hindus should live. That was. However, Gandhi and the Congress very, very strongly opposed both the idea of the two-nation theory. Now today, also, the Hindu right in India pushes the two-nation theory, that Muslims and Hindus cannot live on the basis of equality in India. That the only way that India can manage itself if the Muslims are a controlled minority, which is what Gandhi opposed, which Nehru opposed. They said that India can live with Hindus and Muslims on the basis of equality, equal protection of minorities. But let's also remember that with all the passions, eventually when partition was created, both Pakistan and India committed themselves that we will protect our minorities. Pakistan committed itself, India committed itself. Yes, as far as Punjab was concerned, because the scale of the violence had become so large, both sides agreed that as far as Punjab is concerned, the Sikhs and Hindus of West Punjab will go to East Punjab, the Muslims of East Punjab will come to West Punjab. So in Punjab, some kind of transfer of population was accepted by both governments. This is a matter of historical record. But certainly nowhere else, as far as the government of India was concerned, Gandhi, Nehru were concerned, that there was no question of population transfer, that independent India belonged as much to India's Muslims as it belonged to India's Hindus, and the same was the conviction, the deep conviction, and strongly expressed by Quaid-e-Azam in that August 11 speech. So anyway, I can go on, but these are some facts as I know them.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just like Hindu right today sometimes claims that India is for Hindus, some people in Pakistan are using that also to say that perhaps they are vindicating the two-nation theory in that sense. Dr. Akbar, sir?
When I was researching for my Jinnah Quartet, especially for my book, which I called Jinnah, Pakistan and Islamic Identity, and the subtitle was, it's worth noting, The Search for Salahuddin. Because to my mind, I was placing Mr. Jinnah in the context of Muslim history. And therefore, for us to pin one idea at one time in history and say, this is what Jinnah thought, I think we need to understand that this is a man who's evolving. He's an intelligent man. He has moved from a very neutral position, almost a secular position, to a position where he's now really embodying and representing the Muslim community in the 1930s. And what has moved him in that direction? It is that remarkable interaction with Allama Iqbal, who appeals to him and says, there's a storm coming to India. Very powerful. He's a poet. He writes beautifully. And you're the only man that Muslims can look to for leadership and guidance. Now, when Mr. Jinnah moves in that direction, he's constantly negotiating to get the best deal for the Muslims. There's a remarkable sequence in the film, in the documentary that I made, and it's again worth seeing, it's online, in which Dr. Rafi Zakaria, Farid Zakaria's father, who was based in Bombay and was Indira Gandhi's aide, assistant, and I think also ambassador from India to Saudi Arabia. He's obviously very anti-Jinnah, and he constantly says, oh, Jinnah only favored those people who looked up to him or were his lackeys and so on. But he says, his honesty, his integrity were unimpeachable. He was absolutely a towering figure. And then he tells us this anecdote. He says that Jinnah had pulled back from the Pakistan movement because Jinnah, above all, wanted the security of the Muslims of India, that means India and what became Pakistan, to get the best terms for them. Remember, the situation is changing minute by minute, not day by day, minute by minute. And he pulls back and he says, all right, let me see what I'm offered by the Congress. And I will then put Pakistan on hold. This is just before the creation of Pakistan. And the reporters were shocked and they ran to Nehru and they said, if Jinnah agrees to pull back, what would you say? And Nehru at that moment, at that critical moment, said, I will not accept anything until I have the authority and the power, and then I will decide. And Zakaria quoted Sardar Patel saying, this was the single worst moment in Indian history. Now, when I showed this documentary in Cambridge a couple of years back, there were a lot of Indian historians who came to invited by my friend who was the Pakistan, the Iqbal chair in Cambridge. He hosted this event. A lot of the Indian historians came up to me and said, we don't even know this particular incident. So again, dialogue helps us understand our positions, our respective positions. Mahatma Gandhi, for example, how many Pakistanis or Indians know, and I got this from Dr. Rajmohan Gandhiji's book, that he had wanted to spend 3 months of his time every year in Pakistan, continuing his affection, his interaction with the Muslim community, and 9 months in India. And of course, the Congress party were delighted because he was always reminding them of their promises and the high ideals, etc. So these are founding fathers that we should really begin to understand, appreciate, and apply some of their principles to our own time, and understand that they were human, they were not supermen, that they had their own characteristics, their own flaws. And if we must be inspired by them, let us take the best of what they had to offer us and not impose our own petty minds or prejudices or ignorance onto them and say, why didn't they do this? Sometimes when I go to Pakistan, I'm asked some very odd questions by surprisingly Pakistanis who would say, you are such an admirer of Quaid-e-Azam, you made the movie, you did this. Why didn't he do this? Why didn't he take all of Kashmir? Why did he leave Kashmir unresolved and so on? And we really need to understand that there's something called history that is unfolding. And in that, he's playing a role, but he's up against huge forces, huge forces. He's got the Indian establishment, he's got the British establishment, and some of them very hostile to the ideas that he's promoting and determined to stop him. So just the very fact that he achieved Pakistan, and in 1947, let's remember, it was the largest Muslim nation on earth, was a huge achievement. What we did with it, being able to live up to his high ideals, is not his fault.
Thank you.
मैं कुछ कह सकता हूँ?
जी please, Dr. Gandhi, yes.
एक तो मैं कहना चाहता हूँ that now we have to start from scratch all over again. The situation is so serious and so many things have happened that the history that we are discussing may not have a very direct connection to what we have to start from scratch all over again. And it's a very tough job, but since I'm getting younger, I'm ready to do it. But since we are on history, I would like the Pakistanis also to know, and as some of you know, that Gandhi did try on April 1, 2, and for the first week of April of 1947, this idea that Quaid-e-Azam Jinnah should be invited to become the Prime Minister of a united India. Yeah. Gandhi thought that would prevent, above all, it would prevent violence. He was thinking of Punjab in particular, actually. But anyway, and but this was a serious attempt by Gandhi, but the Nehru and Patel were totally opposed to it. And Mountbatten was very strongly opposed to it. And the idea was never put to, I'm not saying it would have worked. To repeat, I'm saying that, but I wanted to mention this to show the relationship between Gandhi and Jinnah at that time, which is what was part of the story in Gandhi wanting Jinnah to be the Prime Minister of an India where Muslims will be protected, Hindus will be protected. But all this is, in a way, might have beens and ifs are not that important. In fact, even solid history at the moment is not that important. We have to start absolutely from scratch, and we will, God willing, if not tomorrow, if not in 5 years, we will create, God willing, a situation where the people of Pakistan, the people of India, all the people in Kashmir, all the people in that subcontinent will find real peace, real freedom, real trust, and that the suffering of ordinary people will be minimized.
Ameen, Ameen, Ameen. Mashallah, we all agree to that. We all agree to that. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rajbhat.
Thank you very much. Well, gentlemen, ladies, it's been a fascinating session. And I think for you, the working day is starting. So you may have to rush to your own engagements. Here in Pakistan, it's the evening time. May I now request Ambassador Khalid Mahmood, Chairman, Board of Governors of the Institute, to thank the two gentlemen on behalf of the Institute and share his final words. Sir, you have the floor.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. It's really a very difficult task to follow such eminent scholars who have really enriched us with their very deep thoughts at this webinar. This is not their first time that they are interacting with the Institute of Strategic Studies. We have had the honor of hosting both of them at different times at this institute. So it is a matter of not only a pleasure, but as the Chinese would say, it is an occasion for double pleasure. Or double happiness, as they say. You see, the subject matter brings us to the times of the creation of Pakistan. As has been rightly described, that the partition took place in an atmosphere of great hatred. There was a massive dislocation of people, widespread killing, destruction of property, and so on. But it goes to the credit of the founding fathers that even in that atmosphere full of hatred, they advocated democracy, they advocated interfaith harmony, they advocated pluralism. And in both the countries, that was the message which was given by the founding fathers. It is pity, of course, that in actual practice, in both countries, there were phases of animosity, tension, disharmony, hatred between principally Hindus and Muslims. Of course, I feel embarrassed to admit that in this, while India got a better projection of being a democratic and secular state, pluralistic society, and Pakistan did not get that much recognition. But now things have completely changed. That while Pakistan may not be a perfect society at the moment, but India, which was hailed as a center beacon of democracy, pluralism, is going through a very difficult phase, which is marked by subjection of minorities, Muslims, Christians, Dalits, everyone, And but the difference is this time, as I said, this Pakistan and India both have gone through such phases. But the difference at this particular time is that this policy of exclusiveness, of bigotry, that is state-owned or owned by the government in India. That it is the professed policy of Modi government to advocate and practice this discriminatory policies towards its minorities, particularly Muslims. And that finds a very vivid expression, particularly in the case of Kashmir, where I think nobody differs from the fact that the Muslims there are being particularly targeted at this particular moment. So much so that even liberal elements in India, they are, condemning this slide in the Indian polity. I was just reading that Manmohan Singh, the former Prime Minister of India, he says India has slid rapidly from being a global showcase of a model of economic development through liberal democratic methods to a strife-ridden majoritarian state in economic despair. So this is the position as we see it today. But as the learned speakers, both of them have emphasized that we should not give up hope, that there is still possibility of coexistence between not only the minority population and the majority population in both countries, but also between Pakistan and India. Because I also have experienced, how much understanding, affection people of Pakistan and India have for each other at the personal level. I recall the festival of Vasant in Lahore, when it was being observed in droves, people from India would come to Lahore, and there was a festival for 1 week, in which the two people mingled with each other, and as if there was no difference between them. And during my personal visits to India so many times, I have always found a lot of love, affection. And in my professional career, we might be opposing each other tooth and nail in the meetings, but outside the meetings, we had very harmonious relations with each other. So it means that it is possible to bring back that feeling of camaraderie, of affection for each other. But it is easily said than done. What needs to be done? Now I have to be realist also. First is to resolve the conflicts, disputes between the two countries. Because if you do not remove those root causes, then there will be a phase of harmony, camaraderie, but that again, one small incident happens and the whole edifice of friendship, cooperation comes down, crashing comes down. So we have to resolve the disputes. Now, how to resolve the disputes? Of course, there are so many methods. India has been insisting on bilateral negotiations to solve the problem. Yes, Pakistan agrees to it. But if bilateral negotiations do not produce result, then what should be done? I think the answer lies in what the United Nations Charter says. The methods for peace-specific settlement of disputes are described in the Charter, and bilateral negotiations is one of the methods. There is inquiry, there is conciliation, there is arbitration, there is judicial settlement. There are so many avenues available. So I think both countries should try all these specific settlement dispute mechanisms, including bilateral negotiation, and try to solve this problem. Otherwise, I'm afraid that there will be a phase of where everything looks hunky-dory and people are very happy, and then everything is just subverted by one incident here or there. Secondly, I would say that the communication should never be interrupted, which is unfortunately presently the case. And communication not only at the political level, but at every segment, at every level of society. And what's more, I think we need to revive SAARC, because we have, this mechanism where not only between India and Pakistan, but regional cooperation could be advanced. But that institution is also at the moment regrettably moribund, but it is important that the SAARC process should be revived. And I must say that the role of scholars like Dr. Akbar S. Ahmed and Dr. Raj Mohan Gandhi, that is very important, because I think from what I heard from them, they become a catalytic agent in accelerating this process of harmony and understanding between Muslims and Hindus, and between Pakistan and India. And I don't think there is no other option, because other options are frightening, to say the least. If we do not settle problems peacefully, and war is not an option, because if you go the path of war, then there is the danger of nuclear Armageddon, which I think will not be to the benefit of anyone, not only in Pakistan and India, but even the whole region and the world at large. So I think we have to emphasize more the positive points, more areas of commonality, and try to minimize those areas of conflict, of misunderstanding. But we must address these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. With that, tribute to Dr. Akbar S. Ahmed and Dr. Raj Mohan Gandhi, we would like to now close the session. Just to let you know that this will be recorded and placed on, has been recorded and will be placed on the YouTube. And we will also make sure that it reaches you, your mailbox. We'd like to share the link with you for your own remembrance. Once again, very grateful to both the gentlemen and our speaker, Dr. Akbar S. Ahmed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Zindabad.